in this space. As I already said, on one, I wanted to highlight the deep learning Indaba, and you can scan there. This is an idea that we came up with about end of 2016. At that time, a number of us that finished our PhDs came back to the continent, and we're looking around and saying, like, okay, we kind of see the wave that is coming in terms of AI development. Do we have, like, a good ecosystem? So the vision was for Africans to become critical contributors, owners, and shapers of the coming advances in AI and machine learning at the time. And this has grown from a small meeting. The first meeting was about 300 people in Johannesburg, with 600 people having applied. And it very quickly morphed into now the leading research kind of gathering on the continent. And so that's like an annual meeting and conference, which now has multiple tracks. You can go for policy. There's people who are going in for research. There's now papers you submit there as well. And then there's the Indaba X system. The Indaba X's are independently organized. They're smaller. And last year, I think we were able, for the 2 years beforehand, reach 50 out of 54, 55 African countries. So that's like a big milestone of having almost every, I think Indaba X Uganda was last week. All right, so there's all these local communities that are coming together and working in these spaces. Last year's Indaba was in Kigali, the main gathering. As you can see, 150 communities, how many faculty members, and we had 1,200 plus registered participants, and that's the main kind of picture on the day. So worthwhile, if you want to connect, one of the places to apply. I think the deadline has been extended to 4th of April. If you want to come for this meeting, it is a very competitive ticket. So this year you can apply directly to get the ticket, and if you don't want to, you can also buy a lottery ticket. There is literally a lottery now where people are trying to get into this meeting. And if you want to submit a paper and that's the way that you want to go to, the deadline is the 15th of April. I used to be one of the founders. I used to be a trustee up until December last year, but this is a thing. Then the other one is looking at Masakane. Masakane works on specifically African language, natural language processing. We started it in 2019. It was a spin-off from the deep learning Indaba, and it has grown into kind of its own community, 3,000 plus researchers who work on NLP for African languages, working on many kind of spaces. There was an African NLP workshop last week at EECL. That's also being running now for years through this network, and it's really created environment for many researchers to find themselves in the global space as Africans working on African languages. Specifically at ICLR 2023, we had the biggest workshop actually at that ICLR conference, ended up being the African natural language processing one, and it's probably become the most prolific as a network AI research lab on the continent because of just how much work has come out of there and won many awards. Last year, 4 papers from the Masakane network won best papers at ACL 2025. And by the end of the year, there was a big commitment made by Google and a couple of other funders to now fund this new, what's called the Masakane African Languages Hub, which is a spin-off now of a spin-off that then became its own grant maker. So now they are running programs and giving grants for research. This is really the picture I wanted people to stay with. Grassroots or civil organizations in machine learning AI are not new. And what has happened is that in the spaces where there's gaps, there's always been communities that come together and try to build up these areas. So if you are like, either African or interested in working a lot around data science and AI on the African continent, for us, 2015 was the formation of data science. It's another gathering that happens, but does a lot of training and teach the teachers. Then that's 2015. 2016, 2017, there's deep learning Indaba, women in machine learning. So Black in AI. If you go to NeurIPS, there's always a Black in AI workshop that happens in that area, and you see these interacting. So after deep learning Indaba and Data Science Africa started, Kipu now emerges in Latin America. Right, Kipu happens every 2 years, and it's another network that if you're kind of wanting to connect Latin America, there's Masakani in 2019, and now you have America's NLP for South American languages as well. And this keeps on kind of building up and continuing. If you're interested in health in Africa, Sisonke Biotic is there. AfriClimate AI also just got a grant to start up for climate. There's the African Computer Vision Summer School. There's Roya that works on also as well as research. So outside just looking at the traditional, what are the universities doing, even though I'm at a university, this is a good way to kind of understand the landscape, and that's what I wanted to share with everybody. And yeah, I think that's it. And for us, we have a new institute that we just started last year at the University of Pretoria, and happy to chat, for people who are interested in it. So thank you. You found the laptop.
Okay, again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Farnaz Jahanbakhsh. I'm an assistant professor in computer science and engineering with an affiliate appointment with the School of Information. My research is in the area of human-computer interaction. A question that I think about a lot in my research is this: how do we design systems, AI systems included, that respect the fact that people are fundamentally different from each other, right? They have different needs, they have different experiences, they have different values, and so on and so forth. Now, one way to frame this is through the lens of pluralism. The idea that a difference across people and across communities isn't noise to be averaged out. It by itself is an important signal. Right. So systems built on this philosophy are just better at serving people. You know, imagine an assistant. The more it understands where you're coming from, the more it is able to serve you. But even when we as researchers, as system designers, have a normative goal, for example, that we want people to learn something, or that we want to nudge people towards a prosocial outcome for some definition of prosocial, even when we have that goal, the path to that goal looks different for different people, right? That we can't have one-size-fits-all interventions because they don't work as well for everybody. And beyond effectiveness, I think there is something, there's a moral argument here. I think there is something troubling about a handful of platforms or algorithms deciding unilaterally that what is good for many different people with different lives. So pluralism as a design commitment is a thread that binds a lot of my research together, from systems that help people with education with the help of AI, to AI systems that are deployed on social media, such as recommender systems, to generative AI itself. And today I want to tell you about one project of ours where this shows up vividly. This was work led by my PhD student, Rehan Rashid, and this has received a number of awards, including the Best Paper Honorable Mention Award at CHI, where this is going to appear. The context that I want to talk to you about is content moderation, which is this big procedural practice on social media where platforms identify content that is quote-unquote harmful. And that is done according to a universal boundary. And after that, they suppress this content. For example, by removing it altogether from people's feeds, or by downranking it so that the probability that other people see it is lowered. Right? Now, there are two big problems with this. The first one is, we argue, harm varies by person, it varies by time and by context. Could we, or should we even, try to come up with a universal set of criteria and apply it to everybody? Imagine a post joyfully announcing a pregnancy. To somebody who has recently experienced a miscarriage, that post can be very upsetting, right? Or a simple food image. This is benign to most people, but for somebody who is recovering from a binge eating disorder, it can trigger obsessive thoughts and intense cravings that they might not be able to control. And these are both real examples from our participants, by the way. So the bottom line is that there is no universal boundary that captures everybody's experience of harm. What is innocuous to one person can genuinely be damaging to another person, and no centralized platform policy can anticipate that. Okay, but even setting that aside, even if we think that we all can agree on what is a reasonable definition of harm, There is another problem with how moderation works today on social platforms, and that is that the response is always suppression, right? So that is hide it entirely or remove it, but it is all suppression. And that is a blunt instrument because valuable and harmful elements can coexist in the same content. For our participant who is in recovery from the eating disorder, they might still want to see life updates from their friends, but just not the food that is dominating every photo. What we are proposing instead in this work is a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift away from this suppression, from this binary moderation. This new way of content moderation attempts to attenuate the harm in content while still preserving the context in a way that is personalized to each user's definition of harm. And the mechanism we use to achieve this is through personalized content transformation. Okay, before going ahead and building anything, we wanted to make sure that we really understood the problem. So we went and talked to people. We recruited a set of people who had experienced exactly this kind of problem. And this included people with various phobias, with PTSD, people who were going through difficult life events, or just people whose values were different than the norm. And we wanted to understand, okay, what does harm actually look like for you? What have you tried on the platforms that are at your disposal? What has failed and what has worked, right? And through this exercise, we wanted to understand if we could redesign content moderation with pluralism in mind, what should it look like? A few things came out of these conversations that really shaped everything that we built after. One was just how specific and personal these content sensitivities were. For example, a person who was dealing with arachnophobia didn't want to avoid pictures of spiders in general, but just close-up images. That's what triggered them. A participant who had PTSD wanted to still read the news and learn about the current affairs, but did not want to read anything related to civilian deaths because that was causing him flashbacks. Now, another consideration was the temporal nature of these sensitivities. That is, a person may not be in a state of mind right now to deal with certain content, and that has happened pretty much to everybody, right? But it doesn't mean that they want to avoid that content forever. Now, our participants also recognized that they wanted to define their own boundaries, but not at the expense of other people's freedom of expression. That is, they did not want to silence the others. And so any intervention that we would come up with would have to respect that, would have to be on the recipient's side rather than trying to silence the poster. So these conversations really provided us with a set of guidelines about what our intervention should look like. That is, once we take this paradigm and build it into a working system, what kinds of interactions should it enable and support? Based on these insights, we built a browser extension that provides personalized real-time transformation of posts that includes images and text on Reddit feeds. And the architecture is portable to other social media platforms as well. The way it works is that the user defines their sensitivity in their own words using natural language. For example, we have this participant who has said, I have an eating disorder that I'm trying to manage. Food pictures trigger cravings and obsessive thoughts that I can't control. And they also indicate how sensitive they are to this and for how long they want the intervention to be activated. Then our intervention intercepts the content on their feed before the user sees it and applies the appropriate transformation on the content and renders the transformed content to the user. And in the spirit of transparency, we have indicators that show to the user that, hey, this is not the original content, this has been modified, right? So here we have the original feed, which is not shown to the user, and we have its transformation. And when I say the appropriate transformation, putting on our pluralism hat again, it means it is appropriate for that specific user, for that specific piece of content, right? Recall we wanted to attenuate the harmful elements in content. Now, depending on the content and on the user, we might do that, for instance, by taking the distressing element out of the image altogether, like what we have done in the top photo. Or we might do that by reducing the realism of the image. For example, by applying an artistic style to it. Here, we have transformed the image to be more like an impressionist style painting, right? And the art style re-rendering also allows us to change the felt affect of the content. For example, we know that impressionism typically conveys a sense of calm, right, which would be useful in this context. And we have a variety of other types of transformations as well, both for images and for text. I'm showing some of them here, but of course, this is not the full list. Okay, so how do we decide on the best transformation for the content and for a particular user? First of all, we need to preserve as much of the meaning, as much of the original content as possible in the transformed content. Second, we want to push the trigger away from the form that triggers. We want to push it as far away as possible, right? And third, we want the transformed content to not be jarring. We want it to be natural, right? And lastly, we want the transformation to be ethically and culturally appropriate. For example, cartoonifying or trivializing a serious historic photo is not something we want to do. Okay, well, the thing is that there's a trade-off between all of these goals, right? Optimizing for one means would come at the expense of another. We have an AI pipeline that decides on what would be the best transformation, again, for a specific piece of content for a particular user. And what would be kind of the most promising candidate transformation. And then we take that candidate and we generate it sometimes using AI, sometimes using generative AI, sometimes using other approaches, depending on the transformation. All right, so we built the system and we tested it out with real users on their real social media feeds. The reaction overall was very positive. And here I wanted to share this quote from one of our participants, which really gives me joy. I think what you have done is life impacting for people. Even if it's not perfect, I'm so thankful for it. And I think other people are too. The interventions selected by our system for different pieces of content and for people also were aligned with what participants preferred for themselves. And this we tested in a controlled experiment. Okay, but I do want to briefly also talk about some of the broader themes and the implications of this research. A question that might come up here is, okay, through this, are we encouraging avoidance, right? Are we enabling people to avoid what they find uncomfortable? Well, here's the thing. We found through the user studies that, in fact, the opposite might be true. Before having this tool at their disposal, participants would go to, really great lengths to avoid certain connections or to sever the connections that they had just to avoid the content that they couldn't digest, right? But now with this tool, they are able to engage with that content in a reduced form, in a form that they can digest, right? Which allows them to, again, re-engage with those connections and re-engage with that content. So in short, this personalized transformation is enabling engagement. Now, going beyond what I discussed today in this talk, something we're working on currently is if such transformations can be valuable when applied to content more broadly, for example, civic discourse. Can we allow participants in civic discourse to engage with each other's ideas and the intent behind each other's messages if we help with that translation part? All right, so I'm going to stop here, and I will be happy to take questions.
We do have mics on either side of the room. So actually, while we're waiting, I have a question. How do you think this then interacts with things like the platforms also censoring or moderating the content?
Yeah. That is a great question. So this was in part a response to a lot of debate about platforms perhaps underreaching or overreaching in some aspects. And I believe the essentially the gist of the issue comes down to people just disagreeing about what is harmful. And, we have so far suffered from a lack of imagination that, people believe that the only way they can deal with harmful content is through a third party coming in and intervening on their behalf. But now that we have shown that this kind of moderation, this, other paradigm is possible, can we then, perhaps nurture space where people come into agreement about what are the things that we can decide for ourselves and what are the things that we need to then outsource to the platforms?
Wonderful. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Farnaz one more time for her talk. Thank you.
There we go. No? Okay, there we go. All right, my name is William Weaver. I'm a postdoc at Midas, and I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been working on for about 3 years now, where we're leveraging large language models to extract a lot of data from natural history collections. So when I say natural history collections, our first instinct might be thinking about something like this. So I was lucky enough to go to the Missouri Botanic Gardens a few weeks ago. And places like this are a really, really fun place to be. They're a really good way to introduce the public into concepts like conservation and getting engaged with biodiversity research. And it's also a place where you can take a few steps and go from completely different environments. So you could be in an equatorial rainforest, and then a few steps later, you could be in a really dry, arid environment and getting to see all of these crazy plants. Fewer people are aware that a lot of these institutions have research collections. So behind the scenes at the Missouri Botanic Gardens, they have huge greenhouses filled with experiments, filled with plant breeding programs, and a lot of this also goes to further conservation efforts. And fewer still are aware of research collections like an herbarium collection. So an herbarium is essentially a library for dried plant specimens. And for the past couple hundred years, botanists go out into the field, collect plants wherever they are in the world, and they'll take a little snipping, or if it's a small plant, they might dig up the whole thing. We bring it back, we dry it out, and we put it on a piece of paper. And then that piece of paper gets stored away in a huge archive until it's needed for research at a later date. So every vouchered herbarium specimen has two primary components. You have the plant component, and you have archival metadata. And of those two components, the archival metadata is actually the most important part. Without the two linking them together, the plant is just a dried out plant. But basically, we can do a lot of really cool research with herbarium collections. Their biggest advantage is the historical aspect. We have specimens going all the way back into the 1600s in some cases. So we can do a lot of really cool research. We can obtain genetic information from herbarium specimens. We can use them to track the spread of invasive species. We can use it to monitor really rare and endangered taxa. And we can also use herbarium specimens to track phenology changes, so the timing of flowering and leafing events in light of climate change. To give a sense of scale, there are thousands of herbarium collections around the world, and they vary widely in their size. Here at the University of Michigan, we have a rather large collection. We have about 1.75 million specimens. The two largest collections in the United States are Missouri Botanic Gardens and the New York Botanic Gardens. Both of them have around 7 million specimens. Within the United States, we're approaching 80 million individual pieces of paper with plants pressed on them. And then globally, we have about 400 million specimens. So as you can see, the plants are physically stored in stacks, just like you would books in a library. And that can make it pretty challenging to do research with them. For the last couple decades, a lot of collections have started digitizing all of their resources. And this is a very labor-intensive and expensive process. We have to mount the specimen in the first place, then you have to accession it into your collection, you have to photograph the specimen, and then you have to transcribe all of the text on the label into some sort of database system. Then you curate, and then you keep going and going and going until you work through your whole collection. And as it turns out, the most expensive and time-consuming step of this entire process tends to be transcription. So just getting the text off of the label and adding that into the database. So while herbarium collections are hugely valuable for their historical historical range, that also is one of the most challenging parts of their digitization. If a specimen was collected in the last few decades, the labels tend to be typed, which is pretty trivial for us to read and also pretty trivial for optical character recognition algorithms. But as we go back further in time, you start to get really, really hard to read handwritten labels, and they present a lot of challenges. So manual transcription is a very slow process. If someone is well trained, they might average 15 to 20 specimens per hour, assuming that the content is pretty easy to work with. When we start dealing with historical specimens, the transcription rate drops pretty quickly, sometimes on the order of 1 image every 15 minutes. So far, globally, we've only been able to digitize about 48 million specimens. And if we do some napkin math, that means it could take up to 30 years if we to digitize just what we currently have in our collections. So any tool that we can come up with to help increase the pace of digitization is a huge benefit, not just to the institutions, but also to science in general, because all of these collections store a tremendous amount of our natural history knowledge. So the goal of this project, we call this software voucher vision, is to bring optical character recognition algorithms and these days vision language models into the picture and use large language models to parse all of the content in the herbarium specimen labels and then format that in a structured output that the collections can ingest into their database systems. And we also want to make sure that this process is accessible to any collection regardless of their size or their resources. So we started this in 2013, and back then optical character recognition was definitely the limiting factor, and that's still true today, but I don't have to remind any of you that the pace of large language models, the development has been incredibly fast. So just seeing what we were starting with 3 years ago to what we can do now is pretty amazing. This has since grown into a collaboration of more than 40 institutions, and so far our API service, which we host on Google Cloud, has been used to transcribe almost 250,000 specimens in just 6 months. So that's been pretty fun to see. To help make our tools usable, we have a really simple to use website to help people interact with the API. And this is meant to sort of just get their feet wet, and then eventually you can use a Python package to interact with the API directly also. So we start by just picking the model. When we started this 3 years ago, we've explored open source models, we've explored locally hosting. Since then, we've distilled down into just this API use case. So we are focusing just on Gemini 3.1 models, which turn out, fortunately for us, to be some of the most accurate and precise available for this task right now. We also provide the users with some data enrichment. So these are third-party data sets that we can query to help validate the accuracy of the transcriptions. And then the brains behind voucher vision are these prompt templates. So this is how we tell the large language model what we actually want it to do. We curate a pretty big set of prompt styles, and this helps us translate between an herbarium specimen or an insect collection or a mammal tag. And this is also how a collection can dictate what sorts of information they actually want transcribed from the labels. So like I said, there's 4,000 institutions around the world. They all have slightly different workflows that we need to work with. So eventually we upload an image, we get a response back from the API, and if we go back to our specimen from 1886, this is the output from voucher vision. And I don't know about you, but this did a better job than I would have been able to do looking at this label. One other thing to note is that we have a GPS coordinate now. Satellites didn't exist in 1886. So another thing we've been exploring with voucher vision is the ability of large language models to give us accurate GPS coordinates from just the text that appears on a label. And the short answer is it does work. It just depends on how much information is in the label to begin with. So 2 or 3 years ago, you might have used Tesseract OCR to do the same process. And for something like this, it was horrible and useless. So we've made a lot of strides just in the last 3 years. So we've gone from a point where manual transcription was a huge bottleneck in the digitization workflow to a point where voucher vision is a cloud-hosted resource. We can scale it as much as we want. So the new limiting factor is actually editing the transcriptions that the large language models produce. So we've been exploring a variety of ways of doing this, and one of the ways is a zero trust approach, where we put the transcription on the left, and then we have the official record in those green boxes in the middle, and the reviewer has to manually accept every change into the official record. So that's the safest way to ensure that errors aren't propagating into our official databases. But when you do this style of workflow, it turns out to only be about 10 to 15% faster than just manually transcribing everything in the first place. So we've also been exploring with other interfaces to work with this data. So sometimes a field like a date could be very simple, just to scan a column in a spreadsheet. So we provide that as an editing tool as well. And then we also have been working with automated quality control tools so we can batch edit entire fields all at once. And when you start using all of these tools in coordination, we start to get closer to a 50% productivity increase, which is enormous. And in the meantime, the institutions have access to the raw unreviewed data at the same time, which we've found very helpful internally at the University of Michigan, just to know what we have in our collection, even if it isn't trustworthy enough to put on a public-facing database just yet. So some of the challenges that we have, obviously, like everybody else, long-term funding. One of the goals of this project was to make it easy to use and accessible to collections that don't have a lot of resources. Most herbarium collections might only have one person in charge of the entire collection, so that's a huge priority. A lot of data in biodiversity collections exists in the global north, but most of the biodiversity on Earth is in the global south. So we're also trying to make sure that these tools are available to sort of to fix this disparity. And then we also have an issue of digital repatriation. Due to the colonial legacy of specimen collection, a lot of specimens that might have been collected in Brazil 100 years ago, their labels are in English, but with all of these large language models today, we have processes already built that can bidirectionally translate everything back into Portuguese or some other language if the collection wants that. So I just want to thank all of our collaborators so far. It's been a really fun process working with everybody.
Thank you, Will. Now we have some time for questions. As I mentioned, we have mics up front, but let's start with one on Pigeonhole, which is just thinking about Vukosi's earlier presentation. Can you tell us a little bit about that underrepresentation in the Global South and the advances that you've made?
Yes, so of the 50 million specimens that have been digitized, there is representation in the data in the Global South, but they tend to come from Global North institutions. So a lot of specimens at the Missouri Botanic Gardens are from the Amazon. A lot of specimens from Kew in England are from all over the world. And so one of the things that we want to do with this is, for a good reason, there's a lot of trust lost between institutions in the North and institutions in the South. So any tool we make, we don't want to be keeping any of the data that is running through this tool. Our goal is to just let people have access to the tool and do whatever they want with their data. That's been a really important part of this, but it's also really hard to get funding, say, from the National Science Foundation to just let other people use those resources. So, yeah.
I think we have a question up here at the mic.
Thank you. I'm Marivate from the Computer Science Department of Division. I'm also a biologist, and so when I've helped automate some pieces of pipelines in which we interact with biological material, I always, because I work on that too, I keep thinking on how are we going to make sure that these interventions that are helping our data sets get grow better in different ways. How can this goal can not interact negatively with the other goal of also actually preserving the specimens we're trying to preserve, the biological organisms, because we want more people in the loop. We want more people engaged in collections. We want more people engaged in conservation projects. We don't want less people. And effectively, these kind of interventions can totally reduce the amount of people that are being paid to actually, and this can be great for, I mean, quote unquote, great for administrative positions like, okay, we're spending less money and getting more data. That looks good, would look good in our reports, because many times the reports are based in this kind of data. But actually paying human time should not be something that decreases over time, but actually that increases over time. So interpreting the effects of automation and of performance here is something that I think requires some kind of changing how we think about it. And I just want to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think one of the huge problems we have in botany is a lack of taxonomists, because there is no government funding to train people to do taxonomy. So it's really hard to get funding to do that. I don't see this as displacing funding that could be, I think this might be a way to get more funding for jobs like this, because using large language models to do this is fairly affordable. But like at the University of Michigan, the people who are involved in editing and manually transcribing this are not taxonomists. But we could be using the money that we use for that task to, one, get through more specimens. So we're not even, removing anybody from the equation. We're just getting through more specimens because we still have the manual review step. But again, I'm hoping that ultimately this gets us to a point where we can start pointing this money in a place where we can actually train, future scientists instead of just some essentially like clerical task. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for one quick little question. So with such a large, speaking to the time thing, with a large backlog, how realistic do you think that tools like voucher vision can meaningfully reduce that gap that you observed?
So far, the gap isn't the tool itself. It's all of our infrastructure to accommodate tools like this. So like right now, we don't have a good workflow of tagging when something has been AI generated. In this case, it's not generated, but it's AI transcribed. We are working with 2 or 3 different collection database management systems that manage most of the data created and stored for all these biodiversity collections. And we're all working on ways of making sure that we're not just trusting the AI to get it right. So the goal is that every single cell in the spreadsheet where AI was involved will be labeled as such and potentially might not be trusted until a human has reviewed it at some point. But the biggest backlog is actually just our databases can't handle this sort of data yet. And if you want to manually review all of this data, it's still going to take a long time. So a lot of the institutions now, we're front-loading the initial transcription because it does work really well. And then as you get funding, you'll just keep reviewing those specimens. But in the meantime, that data that has been transcribed is incredibly valuable because in some cases, we didn't even know those specimens were in the collection, but now they can be part of a research project or they can inform the collection for what specimens are available for seeking out grants and things like that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Hi. Okay, let's get started. So, hi everyone, my name is Hong, and I'm from School of Information here. And today I want to share a project which is a joint project with my advisors Michelle Templesy and David Jurgens. So, this is a talk about citations. Something we all rely on, but maybe we do not think too carefully about how they actually work. So, I'm going to walk you through how we actually approach this problem, the AI tools we build, and what lessons we learned along the way. So here is something most of us as researchers have experienced at some point. You are reading a paper, it cites an earlier study, and the claim sounds very interesting. So you check down the original, but when you get to the paper, you read it, you realize it does not really say what it said it is about. So maybe the heading is gone, or the scope is getting broadened, or some claim is just wrong. So it's like a telephone game. The original message gets passed from person to person, and somewhere along the way, it becomes something very different. It also helps within science news too. Here is one real example. The original study says magnesium intake is associated with a reduced risk of certain conditions. and then a news article quoting that soften it to magnesium may have some health benefits. By the time it goes to the Twitter, at that time, the hashtag becomes magnesium saves life. So 3 steps and the nuances is completely gone. So that is what we mean by citation fidelity. How much changes as the funding travels through literature. So, and this is not just an academic concern. It can have real consequence. The classic example is the opioid epidemic. In 1980, Porter and Drake published a very brief letter, which is essentially 5 sentences, noting that among hospitalized patients treated with opioids, addiction is very rare, a very carefully scoped observation about a specific population. But later, as the letter gets cited and cited, the context disappeared. So one example of low fidelity is in 1986, when people later cited the claim had inflated to this paying population is literally at no risk for addiction. So up to 2017, there are over 600 citations to the original letter, but only fewer than 20% even mention the correct original hospital setting. So such citation collectively contributed to a misleading narrative of low addiction risk of opioid, which later played a role in the subsequent of opioid epidemic. And now, actually, the sociology of science and the cytometric literature has been studying that problem of citation distortion for decades. But the evidence is always limited. A few hundred citation pairs checked by experts, typically in one single field. So that is enough to confirm that the problem actually exists, but not enough to see systematic patterns. So the natural question here for us is, can we actually measure citation fidelity systematically across all of the science? If so, how can we do that? So we cannot really have human expert label millions of citations one by one. And at that time, 2 things had came together that made our computational approach possible. So first thing is large-scale bibliometric datasets become available. Scientific corpus like Stock give us access to millions of full-text papers with past references. That is data that is simply not exist in very usable and large-scale form before. And then second is fine-tuned NLP models had reached a point where they can classify scientific text with performance comparable to human experts. That is not perfect, but that is correctable enough to serve as a measurement tool for us. So with the 2 pieces in place, we set to build a pipeline that could measure citation fidelity at scale. So how do we actually build this? So the key design is there is no single model can handle all the tasks we needed here. So we decompose that problems into a pipeline of 3 steps. And in each step, different models have different purposes, and we use a fine-tuned model for specific job for that. And step 1 is from the citing paper, we extract sentences that actually report funding from the cited work, which we call the reporting citation. Because not every citation have the same function. Some are background and some are for uses and some are for extension and comparison. So we focus on reporting citation, and we fine-tune a BERT model on pre-annotated datasets to make this distinction. And the second step, from the cited paper, we extract the sentences that are results or conclusions for us to identify corresponding claims the original paper is trying to cite. And for that step, we also fine-tune a model on a large set of annotated biomedical abstracts to detect sentences of results and conclusions. And the third step is, after we get in the reporting citation and the corresponding claim, we measure how faithfully the citation conveys the original claim by scoring how much information is changed from the citation to the corresponding claim. And we also fine-tune a model into a specialized scientific information change metric, which we later validated against human judgment. And this process of collecting good training data and carefully fine-tuning each step is what made the whole measurement possible and able for us to scale to 30 million citation pairs. And so based on that, what did we find? So once the pipeline was in place, we could ask questions that was simply not answerable before the scale. First thing we found is proximity to the source matters in several ways. First is open access papers are cited with higher fidelity than paid wall ones. And within field citations are more faithful than cross-field ones. And third is we found self-citations show the highest fidelity, which makes sense because you will know your own work best. And the second thing is time and seniority also matter. They will play a role in prediction of fidelity. For example, fidelity will decline with temporal distance. The larger the gap between the cited and the citing paper, the less faithful the citation tends to be. And we also found an interesting asymmetry with seniority. As more senior the first author is, the less faithful the citation will be. But there is no clear effect with the last author seniority with the citation fidelity. And the finding we are most excited is about the intermediary source. So we come up with the hypothesis that maybe people are relying on some secondary source without actually reading the original paper. So with the 3 million of citation pairs, we now are able to find the matched ones. We do a quasi-causal experiment here where we found the citations published in the same year, same journal, and cite the same original source. But the only difference is how they actually engage with the original source. One directly cited the original paper, while another also cited the original paper, but it also additionally cited an intermediary paper that also discussed the original work. So that is essentially gives us some causation for this hypothesis. What we found is here, citing through an intermediary source actually reduced fidelity compared to direct engagement. And critically, if an intermediary source was unfaithful, that low fidelity can propagate downstream along the citation chain. But if the intermediary source is faithful, it does not actually add actual damage to the later citations. So it's not like all secondary citations are bad. It's just those unfaithful ones will compound that problem. So that allows us to actually to get empirical evidence for the telephone game. So it can be now quantified across millions of citations. So I should note that what we have done in this work is actually before the language model is fully developed, and that work is published 2 years ago in SAL. So looking back now, language model can probably handle many of these tasks very good. So, but our encoder model used in this work still have major advantage now because of its efficiency. Processing large-scale data, like for here, 30 million of citation pairs, actually, if you are using language models, it will scale up with orders of magnitudes, like it will be slower and more expensive for us. And the fine-tuned encoders are more practical, reproducible, and can be running on UMIS standard cluster. But the large model do open new opportunities, as they can reason through longer document context, not just for what we do here is we are analyzing sentence pairs. And they can explain why a citation is actually unfaithful and not just flag it. And they can actually also generate synthetic training data for us to build better and more sophisticated classifiers for us to later distinguish whether distortion comes from hedging removal or maybe scope inflation or just some factual errors. So the opportunity on going forward is to build on top of the pipeline, not just to replace it. So finally, about the lessons learned here. First, start with the question, because we do not really start that project saying we are going to use transformer, but instead we are trying to understand how citation fidelity varies across disciplines and what are related factors. And then second is we are going to decompose before building, because that is a complex task. We are going to, there is no single model can actually very good handle these tasks. So we have to decompose that task into very specific tasks which have a very different purpose. And the third is be very careful with your measurement, because when we are designing the measure, we are doing many rounds of reinterpretation of what our construct actually measures and what we cannot really be included in this measure. And this process of becoming more careful is actually makes good work better. And the last thing is scale unlocks new questions, and that is the charisma of doing computational social science work, is when you actually have the large scale measurement, the questions existed before for decades now become answerable for the first time, and you will get new empirical evidence. Last slide with acknowledgement to my advisors, and this team is inherently very interdisciplinary because we have expertise from NLP and also sociology of science to make this work possible. So, and thank you all for listening, and this is the QR code for our paper, so I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you. We have the mics, and actually, where is the QR code? Sorry. Ben? How do I pull up the QR code again?
It's not.
So I'm going to pull up the whole QR code if you want to submit, but I'm going to we're actually running just a little short on time, so we may only have time for one question, which is, and I'm going to pull one from Pigeonhole.
Oh, there is one in the audience.
Actually, let's do the in-person one instead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I noticed the error bars are very small, probably based on 12 million sample size. How small can you go? Can you, for example, say this journal's review articles tend to be more off-mark than these other journals' review articles?
Yes, because the thoughtfulness of the metadata actually allows us to do that. Yeah.
Basically, can you still distinguish good and bad when the sample size is 1,000 or 10,000?
That is an interesting question. If that a pattern is obvious enough, we can do that. And because as you noted, the error bar is actually based on millions of citation pairs. So it will be interesting to if large, smaller scale can have same pattern. But thanks for the question.
Thank you. Another round of applause.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zia Chi. I'm a research staff member at the Child and Adolescent Data Lab at the School of Social Work. I want to start by saying I feel genuinely privileged to be here, and being invited to present in a research-intensive environment like this means a lot. So thank you. A little bit about me first. I was trained as a social worker in school, but after discovering my strong passion in solving data problems and programming, I built my technical background, which eventually led me to a position at the intersection of social work research and technology. Much of what I do today, the tools, the methods, and the AI applications, none of them are taught in curriculum yet. I built my skills through working on real-world projects, deep investment in learning, and being fortunate enough to work alongside people who are equally passionate about what this technology can do. And that combination of great and good company has made all the difference. I believe that in my area of work, the future of AI use will be small, local, and agentic. These are the three themes, and they run through everything I'm going to talk about. So in the data lab, we work with child welfare records. We have administrative data from Michigan's child welfare system, which is structured data. We also have a huge amount of unstructured data, which are the case narratives written by CPS workers under enormous time pressure. And these documents contain a lot of important information. Substance abuse, domestic violence, housing problems, firearms, opioids, and a lot more. But that information is buried in the unstructured text, and it never makes it into the structured data fields that policymakers and researchers can actually use. To give you a sense of scale, our collection of data contains over than 1.3 million text records going back to 2009. And it continues to grow because there are always, unfortunately, new child maltreatment happen every single month. And this has been a core challenge for years. Like, how do you reliably get information out of sensitive, messy data at that scale, and sensitive text data at that scale? And how do you do it when your data is so sensitive that sending it to a cloud service like ChatGPT, Cloud, or Gemini is simply not an option? And I believe that this is a universal challenge for anybody who handles sensitive, messy text data and you want to analyze it. So in the data lab, we have been working on this for a long time. I still remember scouring Stack Overflow for hours, sometimes days, to cobble together a solution. And then when ChatGPT released, that pulled me closer to AI. Not because it was trendy, but because I saw what is possible with generative AI. I'm going to take the first two themes together because honestly, they are hard to separate. Working locally and working small reinforce each other at every step. Our work with large collection of text data has grown alongside the advances in technology. Initially, we created rule-based matching system, and then we moved to machine learning, supervised machine learning, and eventually to large language models. Each step opened up the opportunities that the previous one couldn't reach. But here is what I want to be, here's where I want to be specific, because one thing I'm very stubborn about is benchmarking. I do not adopt a tool because it looks impressive in a demo. I want to measure it against our actual tasks with our actual data. And we are very intentional about setting our quality expectations before we run the tests. So when I started running language models locally, I spent a lot of time doing comparative analysis. I tested different model sizes across our classification tasks with our text data. And what surprised me is that models as small as 4 billion parameters can reliably handle work that previous methods were not equipped for. And in social work, we really don't need a 500 billion or a 1 trillion parameter model for many research and administrative tasks. Small is enough, and small is what makes local possible. And local is the best solution when you handle really sensitive data. So now, given our benchmark study, we have processed the entire collection. We classified over than 1.3 million text records, and that opened opportunities beyond our previous capacity. It took a lot of patience and time and iteration to get there, but we're confident in our work because we benchmark. And the same local first philosophy also carries into how we manage our data infrastructure. When I first came to the data lab, the data workflow ran on large CSV files. So a file can be as large as 10 gigabytes, and millions of rows has to be carefully assembled and broken apart by hand for every analysis request. It worked, but even with a lot of iteration and optimization in Python, it was still slow and labor intensive, and honestly not how I wanted to spend my afternoons. So With some performance testing, I created a pipeline that organizes everything into a DuckDB database. This database uses a columnar vectorized query execution engine. You don't need to remember that name. I don't remember it either. But the point is, it cuts the processing time from minutes to just a few seconds. But I will be honest that I also like DuckDB because it has a really cute icon. And that's just sometimes what gets you through the documentation. And the whole system runs on my local machine. It operates entirely on my device, disconnected from internet, nothing sent to the cloud. And my desktop computer with 48 gigabytes of VRAM handles everything we need. And in social work, there is an ongoing debate about whether we should even use generative AI because of privacy concerns, environmental issues, and the fact that it cannot be trusted. But small and local answers all three at once. We do not send any data to the cloud. We run efficient models that don't require massive computing. And we benchmark everything, so we know exactly how much we can trust the output. Whoops. And that constraints has made our work even better because building locally forces you to be resourceful and intentional about every design choice. The third theme is agentic, and this is what I'm most excited about. So I recently built an agent harnessed around the DuckDB database I just talked about. Now I can query the entire database in plain language, and the system writes the code to produce the extract I want. The fact that a large language model can write SQL code shouldn't come as much of a surprise to you, right? But for me, the fact that my agent runs on 27 billion parameter model on my local computer without transmitting any data to the cloud is remarkable. And the model is not doing language work in the way many people think about it. It's writing code. And even small models can do that reliably. So this is a short screen recording of my database agent. And in this case, I was asking a very specific question that I would encounter in my day-to-day work. So I sent, how to start this? Okay. So I sent my query, my agent started to analyze and write the SQL code and execute the SQL queries in the background. And then it gave me the exact answer I was looking for. And everything happened locally. But, of course, agentic goes beyond just querying a database. And I have also been building tools that solve that kind of administrative problems that quietly eat up hours of your week. For example, the research office at our school sends extraordinary number of emails every single week, and keeping up with all of them even feels like a part-time job. So I built an automated weekly digest tool that organizes everything. It organizes all the emails from the research office, summarizes the key information, and then create a weekly digest that include everything you need and can be distributed. So also, if there's any attached files from the original email or a Zoom link or RSVP, they will all be included. So this is a fully automated agentic system. Just to quick summarize my AI journey and what I've learned. Small, local, and agentic. 3 words, but really 2 moves. Small and local go hand in hand. They are what makes it possible to do serious AI work with sensitive data on hardware you own. And agentic is where that foundation starts to pay off in ways that change how you work on day-to-day basis. And all of this is opening up research opportunities that simply wasn't feasible before. Right now, with our child welfare records, I am doing a historical analysis of opioid epidemic as it appears in the child welfare system. And because our data trace back to 2009, I can trace the dynamic over time, from prescription opioid to heroin and now to fentanyl. That story is in the huge amount of case narratives, and it has always been there, but we just didn't have a reliable way to get it out at scale until now, until we have generative AI and those smart models. One lesson underneath all of that is benchmark everything. That's the habit that makes difference between the tools you can trust and the tools you hope are working. So that's my presentation. And if any of the things I talked about overlap with what you do, what you are doing, and I would really welcome the conversation. This is my email address, and I'm really easy to find because I'm the one in the social work building who gets really excited about GPUs, AI, and all kinds of data problems. So thank you.
Time for questions?
I have a quick question.
Could we, here, I'm going to pass you the mic.
Thank you so much. I have quick questions. Like, as you said, you are using local models. Of course, they're smaller in size and runnable locally. And maybe you didn't mention how many GPUs you're using. But I have one question. Like, the local, smaller model, they can confidently hallucinate. Like, particularly for the smaller version. So did you, while benchmarking, you said you benchmarked everything.
Yes.
So did you notice any such cases?
So to answer the hardware part first, my office computer has a NVIDIA RTX A6000 GPU, which is a 96 gigabyte GPU, and I can comfortably run a 128 billion parameter model locally. And if you have, but I also have a Mac Mini, and I can comfortably run a 4B or 8B model locally. So I don't think the hardware matters, but it doesn't constrain your start of using local models. And as for performance, if I run all the models at the same time, not at the same time, if I run all the models on my office computer, but not on different devices, then the performance really depends on its infrastructure, its architecture. For example, GPU-OSS 20B model, it's way faster than the same model size from the Queen 3.5 family or Queen 3 family. And so first thing is depends on the model architecture. And then it also depends on the model size, of course. The smaller the model is, the faster the inference is. And as for performance, that's the purpose of our benchmarking, because we want to know among all those models, which one suits my use case better, which one performs better, and if like 3 models all performance really well. For example, for our benchmark study, any model beyond 4 billion parameter can achieve almost perfect agreement with human coders, human reviewers. So then I don't really want to consider like a 128B model, because 4B model can achieve the same performance. Then I would definitely go with the 4B model. Yeah, does it answer your question?
Yeah, my main part was, did you observe any hallucination in the output file of the LLM output?
Does it have any difference in the output?
Hallucinations. So did you observe any difference in hallucinations?
Hallucinations. Oh, because in our use case, we ask models to process the child welfare records, and we set very strict rules in our prompt. So I would say a model as small as 1.7B is not very good at following the prompt, but For example, for Coin 3 family 4B model with extended reasoning enabled, that follows the prompt without any problem. Yeah.
Actually, this is the end of our time. Thank you
Sure.
so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short